And so I think there are some good segues and some overlap in what we're talking about, but what Jennifer is interested in and promoting and has been working on for many, many years is our policies. So I'm going to segue into policies that the city of Kingston can start looking at in the context of the comprehensive plan having been worked on for a number of years. President Noble, Alderman Deb Brown, Planner Sue Cahill, and a whole host of volunteers have been working really tirelessly for years on this. And it's the first comprehensive plan for Kingston in a half a century, about. So that's part of the story here as well. And addressing the demolition concerns in the comprehensive plan.
We're getting no power here too.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of funky because of that plug. I don't want to unplug it. So that's ongoing. Even though the comprehensive plan is reaching its end point, it's still a dynamic document, and they're still welcoming comments on it. So I finished this up at 1 in the morning, so it's a little hasty, but hopefully it'll contribute to the conversation. So I just call this toward developing policies that protect and promote Kingston's heritage. And projects or buildings that I think of. Oops, you went ahead.
Oh, I thought you told me to.
No, sorry. This also showed up in Jennifer's presentation. It's the post office. It was an absolute gem, a jewel, and it was torn down for a jack-in-the-box. So I don't have to say anything more about that. I think people understand what that means and how tragic it was for Kingston back during the urban renewal days. Next slide. I'm sorry, this is cutting off here, but I'll just read what this says. Preservation. And what I've done is I've just looked at some of the guidelines that come out of come from the American Institute of Architects Guide to Historic Preservation. So these are just verbatim, right out, and with some local examples here at the Booth House, and describing different ways in which old historic structures, and when I say old, I mean those are not obsolete or to be forgotten. There's a lot of intrinsic value in old structures, and we should honor that and make sure they stay with us for as long as absolutely possible. Preservation is defined as applying the measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. Preservation work generally because the focus is on the ongoing maintenance and repair of historic fabric rather than extensive replacement or new construction. Next slide. So this is another excellent example. It's been very well preserved. The architect for this building, the Alms House, is the same architect who designed the building we're in, Kingston City Hall. And this, obviously the county used this building for many years, and recently, I think it's 2014, vacated it and was going to just put it up for sale without any further thought. But it really is an outstanding example of late 19th century architecture. And this is another section of the guide from the AIA, which is called rehabilitation, and that's adapting a property for continuing or new compatible use through repair, alteration, and additions while preserving those portions or features that convey its historical, cultural, architectural values. And in this case, the interior there's nothing special going on in there. If you look in the front door, you just look at it, it's been chopped up quite a bit. So in this case, we're talking about preserving the exterior, not altering it, certainly not demolishing it, but looking at ways in which it can be reborn. And also that speaks to where the National Historic Register comes in. Next slide. So the Alms House, which has its own fascinating history, constructed, and this is later. This is several decades after the Booth House, but it was built in the 1870s. Currently, it's in excellent shape. It's been beautifully maintained. It's a large structure on a large piece of land. And if it's no longer going to be a municipal or county use building, it could be something else. And when a buyer ultimately comes in and takes this property and decides to do something with it, the fact that we are now seeking it, and also legislators Schwartz-Berky and Donaldson have been instrumental in this as well, in getting this, pushing this forward through the Landmarks Commission and so forth, to get a state listing and then ultimately a national listing. But just thinking about some ideas, what could this building be? It could be a lot of different things. It could be a hotel, office complex, apartments, condominiums, energy research center. A lot of things could happen here, and it could generate a lot of revenue for the city, and also be part of an economic revitalization. Next slide. Restoration is another category that the AIA describes, which is essentially accurately depicting the form, materials, features, and character of a property as it appears at a particular period of time. Restoration retains as much of the historic period fabric as possible. Inconsistent features may need to be removed, and missing features faithfully reconstructed in accordance with the restoration period. How many people know what building this is? Show of hands. Okay, maybe 30%. Well, this is a house that was left in a ruinous state, with water and nature taking its toll rapidly up until last summer. The last owner had died and was, I won't say destitute, but was moving from room to room in a smaller and smaller part of the house and it was just left in kind of chaos upon her death. And she had no family to come in and take it or anything. And the bank kind of just said, okay, well, we're just going to forget about it and stop paying taxes. And several years go by and the city can enter into a in-rem process to take over the building. So we had a local builder who was very interested in it. He'd been looking at this building for many years and really wanted to obtain it and start working on it. That happened, and this is over Ameria Street, just at the end of Greenkill. It's a fascinating house. It was built in the mid-1800s, mid-19th century. There are connections to Abraham Lincoln vis-a-vis a senator. There was it had been a woman's house, a nursing home, there's been a lot of things. The acreage went from 15 acres down to an acre and a half. Additions were put on, things were modified, and that's where the restoration part comes in. Well, this contractor is restoring this back to as close to that as absolutely possible. In fact, just last week, this was being put back on. So, and it's a very impressive house to go into. In fact, the top floor, the kind of garret apartment is fully functional, has a bathroom, and it has nice ceilings and beautiful dormer windows. So I encourage anybody who wants to see what the progress, just take a drive down to 80 Maria Street. If you put it in your GPS or your directions, you can just get there. That's in progress. Next slide. Restoration, we just talked about restoration, but reconstruction, I didn't have an example of that, but it's depicting by means of new construction the form, materials, features, and character of historic property that no longer exists as it appeared at a particular period of time in its historic location. I can't think of anything in Kingston like that, but there are examples of that. It's sort of a Disney way of recreating history. So. Post office?
In the trolley barn.
Was that recreated from what it had been prior? No, maybe that's a little different, but okay. It wasn't. You mean rebuilding the post office? You have to talk to the hot wings people. Next slide. So this is a building down on, identification of historic properties. Local lists are usually prepared by a municipal landmark commission, so we have that in place, and we can maybe make that a more robust commission. But I think they're doing a commendable job in just raising awareness. So this is an interesting little house. It looks very sad, but it was slated for demolition, and I thought, well, this is, by the way, what's not in the photograph here is the train trestle, which is right here, and it just dominates and is much higher than this little house is standing. But it's part of a story of the Delaware and Hudson Canal and the Rondout and the commerce and the workers. So that's going to be a good segue for Eileen. So that building is now under renovation by new owners. The city sold it for $5,000. I think the water and sewer hookup was worth more than that. But at least it's not torn down. At least taxpayer money wasn't wasted, and this will be back on the tax rolls, producing revenue, and will be restored. It is from the 1820 teens. Next slide. That's on Beale Street. So identification of historic properties. Statewide surveys are conducted by the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO. Mainless properties in district as local landmarks. States also recommend listings for the National Register, as I mentioned, for the Alms House. So this is this house we just looked at. It was in better shape when this photograph was taken. But what is taken here is they look at the condition, the integrity, in this case back then, because it wasn't being neglected. It was excellent, and the integrity was high. It talks about the materials, the architectural system, and they do this. This case is the DOT. They inventory projects or properties all across the state. So that's something we need to be aware of. Next slide. National Register of Historic Places is administered by the National Park Service. And historic preservation in each state. This register lists historic properties that meet the criteria of the National Register that may be of local, state, or national significance. More than 50,000 individual and historic district properties are currently included on the register. And here's an old stereoscope picture, like postcard picture of the original Kingston City Hall, designed by the architect Arthur Crooks, and then it was renovated. T.R. Gallo was instrumental in obtaining grant monies, and that's the building we're in now. We have a couple of lunettes to include, but it's a beautiful building and a real tribute to what can be done when people get together and say, let's save this building. It's been derelict for 25, 30 years or more. So this is what can happen. Next slide. Sometimes you lose properties. The greatest benefit of historic preservation is the protection and interpretation of our cultural heritage. Buildings are a true record of the period or society that created them. They are a primary source of historical information. So this is the trolley barn that was taken down, I think, 10, 12 years ago, which is now where the Walgreens stands. This was one of 3 identified trolley barns in the country. So we lost that, and as you can see, it didn't need to get lost, but it was taken down. So that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see our city avoid. Next slide. Historic preservation benefits. Historic and social value. Preserving older neighborhoods, restoring a landmark county courthouse, or adaptive use of railroad stations or other unutilized buildings across the country far exceeds the direct economic benefits. So you invest $1 in something like this, it's hard to quantify, really. Maybe not something to qualify, but quantify what the benefit is. So it's very tied in. saving buildings are part of an economic plan, not just a cultural and historic plan. Next slide. The UPAC, this is the interior UPAC. I just want to show all the people. This was one of the first two buildings along with the Kingston City Hall that were listed in the National Register. Preservation makes a significant contribution to the beauty and enjoyment of our cities, towns, and rural landscapes, and to the quality of life in these special places. Next slide. At the same time, the economic benefits of preservation are not inconsequential. Solid documentation exists regarding benefits to the tax base of communities and stimulation of the economy. And of course, that's the Senate House, which is run by the state, and has thousands of visitors every year. And those visitors go to businesses in uptown Kingston, in this case. And you know what's happening down on the Hudson, the old brickyard now with the smorgasbord folks. They're going in there and they're going to tidy it up a little bit, but they're keeping that industrial relic, which is an amazing assortment of forms and structures and materials, and they're going to bring people down there. So it's going to be very different from the Senate House, but still it's about economic development and celebrating even something that's a ruin can be utilized and experienced. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm taking more time than I wanted. Into the comprehensive plan, just briefly, the four designated, I'm going to run through this quickly. So we have the four districts: the Stockade Historic District, the Rondout Historic District, Fair Street, and the Chestnut Street Historic District. And their boundaries are outlined because I guess nothing goes beyond a boundary, and those are in the comprehensive plan. So those are four areas. And like Jennifer was saying, and like our other speakers were mentioning, Wilbur is maybe overshadowed, underappreciated, could become its own historic district, could become part of the Delaware Hudson Canal linear park, walking park, bicycling. Next slide. So I don't want to read through all of this, but if you look at the comprehensive plan, I don't know if a good readable version is available on the city website. That's a whole other issue. But there's a section of goals, and there are about, I think 14 or so that's why I don't want to spend too much time. But goal number 6 is just about promoting further preservation of city historic and architectural resources and leverage them for further economic development. So it's all tied together. Next slide. Goes on, talks about the green line, talks about the support of the preparation, preservation, interpretive and marketing plans. Next slide. Procedures, methods, how to inventory, how to catalog, and the Bluestone survey was amazing. It looked at I think 11.5 miles of sidewalks, and it inventories how much bluestone there is, how much asphalt, how much concrete, how much pavers. It's really something to behold. So thanks for working on that. And Jennifer was part of that too, and George. Next slide. Oh, go back one, please. Sorry.
Did you say
Or no, if you can.
what?
If you can.
What, go back?
Yeah. No, I just want to say task landmarks commission with assistance to local landmark owners. So obviously a lot of these old buildings are very much used. They're part of our lives and we live in them. We live in a 1900 Victorian, but those folks who have plaques on their front doors, they need to know how to take care of their be kind of stewards of those buildings that they use for life, for living, for working. So I just want to make a point of that. Next slide. So a model for historic district commission guidelines. I just found this very quickly, and now I have to put my glasses on. So Lexington, Mass. I just use this. I go here once in a while because it's where I'm from, and it's a very revolutionary town with lots of old colonial buildings and some newer ones. So this is how they address demolition. I thought it was kind of interesting and worth sharing. The Lexington Historical Commission is a 5-member board appointed by the town manager with Board of Selectmen approval. It holds public hearings with respect to any proposed demolition that is not in one of the historic districts. So I think that's important to note. It's not in a historic district. So you have to look at the whole municipality and understand what could be in jeopardy, and then don't let too much time go by before it's too late. At the hearings, if an architecturally or historically significant building is found to be preferably preserved, no demolition permit can be issued until the earlier of the commission's finding that there is no reasonable likelihood that the owner or other group or person is willing to purchase, preserve, rehabilitate, or restore, like those AIA points, the building, or continuing bona fide and reasonable efforts to locate a purchaser to preserve, rehabilitate, or restore the building, having been unsuccessful, or 12 months have elapsed since the commission's determination. So I thought that was something that Kingston can take a look at and maybe find its own version of what works for us. Next slide. So this is just a blow-up of the old map from the 1858 French cartographer whose name escapes me. I'm going to show the Wilbur section that could be part of a new historic district. And the toll, Jacob Chambers, the toll gatekeeper, is right up here, up the hill. I think this was Nathaniel Booth's, store, I believe. I'm not sure. Maybe you know that. Right?
The store was down here, down the street, runs into
Down lower. Well, it's some type of store. But it's interesting to me, I counted all these little squares, and there may be 40 of them, and only a handful have names assigned to them. So the fact that Nathaniel Booth's residence is noted, I think tells us something. So down here you see the Booth brothers. That's where they had their own yard of bluestone ready to go out onto the Rondout for delivery and placement in New York City buildings and sidewalks and so forth. Next slide. And I'm closing on this. I'm sorry to be reading so much straight off of it, but I just literally stumbled on this. And this is from about a year ago. Maybe you were here, Katie. So comments of Daniel McKay. He's the Director of Public Policy for the Preservation League of New York State, New York Statewide Historic Preservation Advocacy for not-for-profit. This is a city, he's talking about Kingston, that is densely historic. It has been well recognized for that, with designations and recognition at both the national and state levels. And there's no reference either in the introduction to this document, it's talking about the comprehensive plan, or in the later historic preservation chapter to the National Register of Districts that exist here, the individual National Register listings, the National Historic Landmark that has been designated here in the community, the National Register eligible structures that the State Preservation Office has found here as well, nor any reference to the federal heritage area that overlays Kingston and numerous other communities here in the Mid-Hudson Valley or the Greenway, etc. So I think that's kind of a call for us to make sure that when he comes back the next time, he can't say that again, because we want to be right on top of it and inventory, catalog, and then do what we can to preserve buildings, structures, monuments, landmarks in our city. Thank you. Agenda there, Kitty?
Pardon? Do I have?
Eileen, I think it's here. Okay, this is a perfect segue for Eileen.
Well, Jim, just look for it.
Work for you.
What's
You're
it?
up. You're up. Come
She
on.
wants to know if you can get the map that was of the D&H
I'll find it. I'll find it for you.
Shall I?
Shall I?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Hopefully this will work.
Hopefully it'll work. If not, I was a school teacher for decades, and I'm actually a retired superintendent of schools from Rondout Valley Central School District, and currently president of the Rondout Valley Education Foundation, and vice president of the D&H Canal Historical Society. I discovered after nearly 40 years in public education, there was a life outside of school, and it's an exciting, continuing life. I have with us today the president of the D&H Canal Historical Society, Will Merchant, and we have Joanna Hecht and David Keim, and I don't know if there's anybody else from our board of directors. We're in a very exciting place at the D&H Canal at the moment. So I'm going to take us back to how we got to where we are and where we hope to be. The D&H Canal was conceptualized just about 200 years ago. In the early 1800s, the brothers Wirtz had received some property in Pennsylvania, and he was aware that there was this stone that could be burned and create an enormous amount of heat and burn long and steady. And that is, of course, anthracite coal in northeast Pennsylvania. And he realized, these brothers realized that there's an enormous market for this coal, but Pennsylvania already in the city of Philadelphia had a source of coal. So the next biggest town, which they thought about, was New York City. And New York City had been using coal from England, and that had been disrupted by the War of 1812. And they were also using, of course, wood. But over the course of the decades that New York City had been developing, the wood source in the Hudson Valley and surrounding New York City basically had been decimated because they were using wood for building and using wood for heating and building wood for boats and carts and everything. So the potential for this anthracite coal was considered to be enormous. But if we get the map up, that'll be great. The opportunity to get that, or the way that they needed to get the coal to New York City was not going to be easy. Because if you go due east, you can go due east, but you have to go over mountains. And this is at a time when there are no railroads and trains. There are virtually no roads, and certainly no roads going over the mountains that could haul the amount of coal that they were potentially going to be able to market. And this was the age of canals. There had been canals in Europe for forever, and the Erie Canal was just developing and had been developed along the Mohawk Valley. And so the Wirtz brothers decided that the best opportunity was actually to go north and east to Kingston or the Rondout, and then down the Hudson River to New York City. So in order to get there, they decided that a canal was the best and most efficient way to do that. So in 1823, he hired some engineers, and they got this plan developed. And then in January 1825, they had the conceptualization, they had a plan, and they brought their plans down to New York City. Tontine Tavern, right down in the Wall Street area. We were talking about the Wall Street taverns. And they demonstrated this anthracite coal and how well and hot and strong and long it burned. And in one afternoon, they sold their entire stock, and it was over $10 million of stock one afternoon. And from that point on, the entire project exploded. It basically exploded, because in 3 years, they finished surveying, dug by hand, blasted out bedrock, built bridges, and created a 108-mile canal from Honesdale, Pennsylvania to the Rondout. and even building the island dock where they would transfer the coal from small barges, there we go, small barges along the canal to larger barges originally. So this was, just since I had seen it from Jennifer's, if you haven't seen this map, it is fascinating. 108 miles in the 1820s in 3 years. That includes all the permits and charters and hiring and literally digging by hand and using block and tackle. It's almost incomprehensible what got accomplished in 3 years. So Honesdale, which is out here in Pennsylvania, down to Port Jervis. Jervis was one of the engineers, and then up along the Rondout Creek, parallel to the Rondout, which was the terminus. 108 miles, 108 locks, bridges going across, and ultimately, a few decades later, as they expanded, aqueducts that were designed by John Roebling before he designed the Brooklyn Bridge. So from 1825 to 1828, 10,000 workers, laborers, Irish, German, Italian, native New Yorkers, all worked to build this canal. And so the Rondout area, as the terminus of the canal, where the Booth House is, got a lot of business because this is where all the transfer of the coal from the small barges to the river-going barges occurred originally. Later on, as the barges got larger, they were able to be lashed together and brought down the Hudson without transferring it. But initially, they had to move the coal from these little barges to these bigger barges that could get to be seaworthy enough to do the Hudson River. So, 50 years ago, so from 1828 to 1898, the canal functioned, and at some points, there are 1,000 boats on the canal at any given time. 1,000 boats. 1,000. And all bringing coal, and then other goods, bluestone, cement, millstones, produce from the farms, up and down the canal. And again, the Rondout being the northeastern end, with the ultimate goal of bringing things to New York City and the rest of the world from there. 50 years ago, a group of people got together and decided that there was a great deal that this canal had contributed to this area, and created the D&H Canal Historical Society. At that point, the goal or the mission was to preserve the memory and the artifacts of the canal and to celebrate all of the influence that the canal had had along the way. And again, we live surrounded by the influences of the canal, and as they had mentioned, all the historic structures that you have here in Kingston. And all along the canal, there were all these buildings and remnants and pieces of history that we live with all the time, but we don't even think about it because we're just surrounded with it. But the mission of the D&H Canal Historical Society is to preserve them, to educate folks about them, and to bring the canal in its current iteration, little snippets of it, back to life for young people and for people in our area. And all over. We have people that come all the way from Europe and Alaska and you name it. So 50 years ago, the Canal Society then developed the museum and repurposed a church in High Falls, and that is still the location of the D&H Canal Museum. 20 years ago, we developed the 5 locks or thereabouts, and so now the towpath for the 5 locks in High Falls is preserved, and the locks are along there. By the way, the High Falls was one of the busiest ports along the canal because there were 5 locks, and you couldn't run any more than 1 barge through a lock at any one time. So you had a lot of backup, and so things would back up, and there would be business that people could take care of and, you know, restore their barges and stay there for the night. I mean, there were because there were 5 locks, there was a lot of slowing down, so a lot of development right there to support the canal. 3 years ago, we purchased the Shaw House. Captain Shaw, who was a canoler, a canal boat captain, which is right adjacent to the museum. And the concept at that time was to develop it into a residence, preserve it, and then to create a library adjacent to it. But right about the same time, and once we had actually done that, it came to our attention that the Deploy Canal House, which was an original property of the D&H Canal Company, was going to be made available. And after lots and lots of discussion, I will tell you, you will have lots and lots of discussions about Booth House and many things, because it takes a lot of energy and effort and money to accomplish preservation and restoration. We were able to get a grant from the New York, and Bill's gonna make sure I say it properly, the New York State Department of Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation and the Open Space Institute. In order to reconceptualize the museum. Again, 200 years ago, creation of a canal, unbelievable technology. 50 years ago, creation of a historic society whose sole aim is to preserve and protect and educate and to celebrate the life and culture of the folks along the canal. And now we are moving forward. We did actually purchase the canal house. We are in the process of stabilizing it. There were some repairs to stabilize the building. Again, it is a building from the 19th century, so it's a 200-year-old building. And that has its challenges, as you might imagine. And we will be looking to reconceptualize the museum and ultimately move the D&H Canal Museum to the Deploy Canal House, which is so close to, again, it is right along the canal walk, the 5 locks walk, so literally you would be able to go to the museum and then walk along the canal. By the way, I recommend that you come to our museum. It's a lovely museum. We open the first week in May. And our 5 locks walk is open to the public every day of the year. You know, snow, rain, sun. Just to feel the history along those locks is so exciting. I think, you know, the theme of today's talk was the Booth House and how saving the Booth House can enrich our lives. I can tell you that it is, the Booth House just came to my attention. I literally had traveled past it probably 100 times. My mom lived on Wilbur Avenue at the Manor House, the Mountain Valley Manor, for several years. And I would use that road to go down to the Rondout and feed the birds with my mom. And so I passed it hundreds of times and probably never noticed it once. But I do think, as you said, you feel that. You feel the history when you are in an area. And I think that the preservation of our history is a preservation of who we are as a people and a culture. The names from that era down in Wilbur and the Rondout, the names of the folks and the families on the canal and all along the canal are still with us. If you look if you look in the telephone book, or the equivalent of the telephone book these days, the digital telephone book, you will see the names from that era. You will see the families still here in Kingston, in our area, today. If you happen to travel down the Hudson River and see the building of the Tappan Zee Bridge, you will see Roebling's technology in the 21st century as they build the new Tappan Zee Bridge, the suspension twisted wire bridge supports. So the past, the present, and the future are all tied together. They're all tied together. We are all part of that whole bigger picture. And the D&H Canal Historical Society is working to preserve the past, celebrate the present, and enjoy what we have at the museum in our area, and then conceptualize the future and bring the past into the future by going forward with this project. Scary, it's big, but anything worthwhile is worth taking a chance to go forward on. And I have to commend the members of our board who have supported this project, and we're just at the very beginnings. We're, again, stabilizing the building. We're going to conceptualize how it can be reconfigured to house a contemporary museum and go forward with the plans over the next 3 years. And again, I get back to that 3 years again. In 1825 to 1828, 108 miles dug and developed, and in 2016, it takes 3 years to redo a building, but a little more regulation, a little more red tape, a little more money, but it all works out in the end. I want to thank you for inviting us, and I hope you'll come to the D&H Canal Museum. We have an annual meeting next Sunday at 1 p.m., and we invite everyone who loves history to come, and you'll hear a little bit more from our president about the project, and we also have a guest speaker, historian Stephen Scott. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Camasso. And thank you for your rolling up your sleeves and doing a lot of the hard work, going in and actually obtaining these buildings. I know it's a huge, something large to take on. So next up, we're going to have Lowell come up and say a few words about whatever he cares to talk about, Chestnut Street, and maybe the historic districts of Kingston. Lowell?
Oh, thank you, Brad. Speaking of the almshouse that you showed a few presentations back, this morning I was working, Bill Rhoads and I have been working on behalf of the Friends of Historic Kingston on a nomination for the almshouse to the National Register. And this morning I came across a paragraph that someone had prepared for a presentation to the county arguing for its status as a national landmark. And I want to read the paragraph to you because it sort of clicked with me. The paragraph is not by Bill or myself, by the way. We don't know who it's by. Maybe somebody right here in this room. Preservation of historic buildings and economic development are equal partners as we look to the future. We applaud the arrival of newcomers investing in our region who tell us they are attracted here by the history of the city and region. The history they cite is integral with the built environment, and so we must preserve the fabric of the story. The fabric of the story was what registered with me. Yes, you really have to have some fabric. The big blue stone building by the side of the former stone tramway that came down the road to Wilbur, a building that may once have been the residence of Nathaniel Booth, is, and I think it would be difficult to dispute, an integral part of the fabric that can tell the story of the great Ulster County bluestone industry of the 19th century. An industry that, speaking of fabric, laid its impression on the sidewalks and curbstones of many American cities, and that can still be seen occasionally near historic places. For example, Bryant Park behind the New York Public Library is laid almost entirely with bluestone that appears to be Ulster County bluestone. This is really a story that hasn't been told yet. The story of an industry that, according to one 19th century source, employed as many as 10,000 people in the county. But the story could be told, it could be used to attract heritage tourism and be one more reason why people might want to find Kingston an attractive place to move to. And to tell the story, you need to have buildings and other artifacts and places to point to, things to look at that will trigger the imagination. That is one reason why this building is so important. What we're talking about today, the Nathaniel Booth building. The remaining physical evidence of this great industry is scant, and every building is important. This particular building is utterly unique. A Greek revival vernacular building of bluestone rubble that now stands brooding over a ghost road down which we can almost hear the clatter of overloaded wagons straining to stay in the grooves. If heritage tourism as part of the economy is one reason to preserve this building, the other major reason is more nebulous. That it's a part of what makes Kingston unlike any other place on earth. That idea that the feeling of a sense of place has value. And this particular piece of the story fabric is too important to lose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lowell. Is Bill here? No. Bill, you're going to come up next, and you're a scholar and historian of Kingston, and I think you can add to the story. And
thanks, Brent.
so thanks for coming.
Can you all hear me? Okay. I'd like to express regret, maybe apology, from SUNY New Paltz to Brad, Will, and Mother for demolishing your family home for that science building, which will serve a good purpose, but we still regret the loss of the house. So, I'm Bill Rhoads. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Friends of Historic Kingston, and I'm a Professor Emeritus of Art and Architectural History at SUNY New Paltz. I've been studying Kingston architecture for years, but sadly, I overlooked the Booth House until recently, when it was threatened with demolition. Now, after beginning to study the house, its history, and the life of Nathaniel Booth, it is clear to me that the building is of great historical importance, and like the Fitch office nearby on Rondout Creek, deserves preservation and listing on the National Register of Historic Places. Nathaniel Booth, as you know, was a dealer in Ulster County bluestone, the stone used in constructing at least the exterior of the house. The bluestone industry had a key role in Kingston's 19th century prosperity, and so the house should be preserved, like the Fitch office, as a landmark memorializing one of the industrial roots of today's Kingston. As we drive by, or perhaps walk by the house, we are struck by how simple are the forms of the house, essentially Greek Revival simplicity. From his diary, we know that Booth was well aware of grand and highly ornamental architecture. He wrote admiringly in his diary of the U.S. Capitol and compared the designs of Sir Christopher Wren and Michelangelo to the disorderly spaces of the Wilbur store that Jeff Miller referred to. But Booth also suggested the splendor of Judge Forsyth's mansion on Albany Avenue in Kingston. That splendor would astonish and offend the old honest Dutch of the town. This is a line which I've stolen from Professor Blumin page, I think, 193 in his book. So, thank you, sir. Booth himself wrote of his satisfaction with a home that was small, neat, and simple. So perhaps we have in the plain bluestone walls of the house on Wilbur Avenue both a memorial to the bluestone industry and to the unpretending taste of a Kingston merchant. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Last but not least, we have our esteemed Ed Ford, who's agreed to be here and say a few words. So, Ed, thank you very much. Careful, there's a cord here.
You'll be glad to know I don't have a speech. But I will want to mention a couple things. I've been aware of the Booth House, I call it, for a number of years. I wasn't always sure what part Nathaniel had in building that house, but when I realized that he and his brothers, who had come from England originally, had a bluestone business down there, and I've even seen in one of the old not city directory, before the city, old directory, that the Booth brothers had an ad in New York City. So they had a business down there. And when I look at the building very carefully, you can see that it was made of, instead of large blocks of bluestone, there were more slabs of pieces that were left over from other jobs and cut off, and nobody wanted those, kind of rubble stone. But they were worth something to them, and it's a very unique house. I've been inside, and a few years ago, I don't recall exactly, it was very plain and simple, of course. And so what I would like to see, as Bill Rhoads just said, is that house remains stabilized as the memorial to all the bluestone people that worked all their lives on bringing those stones to market and making a living, and it was hard work, I'm sure, in those days. And I think we owe it to them, and it would be an addition to our history, and we would hope that it would be saved. I just want to say one more thing. I don't know what's back there now, but I hear every week about the old post office and its destruction. And I thought I'd take a day off today, and I looked back there, and there was the old post office. I'll have to tell you that we hope those things will never happen again. But we have to, and all these preservationists that have spoken before me have done a great job of showing that how important preservation is in our area here. We have the most historic site in New York State and in the whole country. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed.
You're welcome.
Keeping it short and sweet. Not many people know this, but Ed Ford was one of my grandfather's students, which I think is very cool. Mark Yallum is going to say a few words now, and I wanted to say to Mark, thank you very much for being instrumental in putting this together today.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming here today. My name is Mark Yallum. I have an online group called Ulster Counties written in stone Ulster County's historic legacy. We have about 1,000 members now, and our primary focus is to document the vernacular architecture of the area, those are the old stone houses. We also advocate for historic preservation when we can, and Brad Will has been the preservationist main ally in local government, and I'd like to thank him for that. I'd like to thank written in stone member Yvonne Weinkoop for reaching out first to the distinguished Professor Blumin and getting him here today for us. And I think we should all thank Mayor Noble for giving us the month-long moratorium on demolition, which gave us just enough time to get started here and to make this all happen. This meeting was organized on short notice, and this is an evolving situation. But I must say that the way that everyone came together on short notice for this cause was really absolutely magnetic. It means that there really is some magic here. There's enough of a common will in this community that we can save the structure. So I'd like to tell you a few things about the current state of the building, in which I hold absolutely no interest. A contractor visited the building recently and prepared a series of 10 engineering drawings for possibly stabilizing the building. This project is ready to go. It's viable, and the pieces of wall that were falling off of the building in the front are not threatening to the structure. This is for a very interesting reason, which I will tell you about in just a moment. So there's a project which is ready to move forward for stabilizing the building. For that to happen, we need to have a renewal of 1 month moratorium further, so that the demolition is put off for another month. There is a not-for-profit entity currently being formed. It has not taken its final shape yet, but this entity will take in charge the initial stabilization of this building. It's a complicated, evolving situation. As I said, this is a privately owned property. There are taxes owed on it, and there are structural issues, to be sure, but the building walls are plumb, the roof is tight, and the structure is basically sound. The cannon should be rescued. We need this time. I'm glad we're here in City Hall. We wanted to hold the meeting here in order to draw attention to the fact that this has become a major issue in the community, and we need to make sure that the moratorium on demolition is extended for another month. This is the mayor's decision. I can give you one very compelling argument for this, which has nothing to do with historic preservation. Demolishing the building would cost the city $35,000, and there would be no expense associated with transferring the building to the not-for-profit organization. There are issues that need to be resolved. The arrear situation needs to be negotiated. It hasn't all been worked out yet, but it can be done, and we just need a little more time. We need another month. So, for those of you who don't care about historic preservation, none of you are here, there are other reasons. There are actually valid reasons why this is not just a meeting of people who are cranky old preservationists. Right? The demolition is not a viable, it's not an acceptable alternative in this situation. So as I said, this is an evolving situation, and a plan for stabilizing the building in the near term is already been prepared. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the The building itself that has interesting facts that have recently emerged. The